Okay, so I am here with Brett Scott at the Internet of Agreements Conference, and you are the author of The Heretic's Guide to Finance.
Global Finance.
The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, and you have a huge, broad-ranging perspective on the global financial industry and maybe how blockchain is going to start changing that. So let's start off by maybe talking a little bit about your background and the topics you've written about and how you got interested in finance.
Sure. Well, I've worked in the financial sector, in the world of over-the-counter derivatives, it's part of like high finance, it's part of like investment banking. Then I wrote a book on the financial sector, which was The Heretic's Guide to Global Finance, and then I worked with lots of activist groups and financial reform communities, looking at how you'd change the financial system or running campaigns on the financial system. And then also looking a lot at sort of money systems, in particular sort of the dynamics of money systems, alternative money systems, of which Bitcoin is one. It's definitely not the only one. Also increasingly the intersection of digital technology with finance. I don't necessarily have a uniformly positive view on that.
Interesting. Okay.
I'm quite critical often of technology.
So what is your view on it?
On digital finance? Or?
Well, you said Bitcoin and then some of the other ones, so you're a
Bitcoin.
little bit critical?
I mean, I'm glad that Bitcoin exists. I use Bitcoin. I can see the background it's come out of and the critique, but I tend to find the Bitcoin community often has quite, shallow understandings of financial systems. So this idea that you can just have this sort of static token that moves around and somehow that's going to disrupt the financial sector. I mean, the financial sector is far more multifaceted and far more powerful than the Bitcoin community often gives it credit for. But the basic impulse behind Bitcoin is very profound. I mean, the idea that you could essentially have pass tokens between yourselves without relying upon a central party. That's a very historically a very important breakthrough, obviously, which is now being applied to other areas, which is sort of blockchain technology more generally.
So where is the blockchain community underestimating the financial system, and where are the blind spots?
Well, I mean, one immediate observation, which is not that hard to point out, is that the financial industry itself is pouring lots of money into blockchain technology. Right, because you can use the same underlying technology in closed settings. So it doesn't have to be open systems. All the private blockchain stuff is essentially just efficiency plays for existing corporations. Whatever. I mean, corporations like to improve their efficiency, and if they can do that with because they already collectively run systems between themselves. So, for example, in the financial industry, the payment system and the clearing systems, all these things are collectively run by the banks. And then if they can find a new way to do that, then you'll do that. I mean, these are pragmatic organizations. They just will use whatever's available and if it works. So that's like one sign of the fact that this technology is actually being appropriated a lot. But even in the open versions of the technology cannot right now replicate what the financial institutions do. In particular, Bitcoin is a payment system. It's a way to move, in essence, move tokens between people. Like the banking sector does far more than that. The banking sector dominates the credit system of society. Essentially, it dominates the issuance of money itself. And in being able to do that, it has extraordinary amounts of creative power, as it were. And there's a broader problem here about education around money systems and financial systems. And the original Bitcoin community, I don't want to simplify it, but in general, there's quite a poor understanding of how banking systems work and a poor understanding of money systems. And money systems, and particularly this idea that money is some kind of commodity that banks move around. That comes out of economics 101 textbooks, and it's completely flawed.
What would a better understanding be?
A better understanding is that your money systems are essentially credit systems. Your money is created from credit at both the state level and at the bank level. So you have your sort of layers of a monetary system, your base layer being your state system, where literally states can spend money into existence. And then the second layer of that's the banking sector, where essentially banks can do the same, essentially issue promises. And the money that you have is essentially just privately issued bank promises. This gets technical if you really want to get into it, but this is how the system works. And then the payment system is kind of like the top layer of that, where you can move the bank IOUs between people. Bitcoin kind of like worked out like, okay, we found a way to move tokens between people, but it's very unsure as to what the tokens actually are.
Yes.
I mean, where you know the traditional money system, you know what the tokens are. They have explicit redeemability. And this is a more general problem with blockchain technology, is it's profound and cool to be able to like say issue tokens, but like it's like me issuing a blank piece of paper, you know. It's like cool. So you have an object that you move around. But like what is the object?
Okay.
You know, like that's often the big question that's going on right now with the debates around the legal characterization of these tokens. So for example, with ICOs right now, what are these objects they're issuing? Are they shares? Are they like utility tokens? Are they some kind of hybrid? And nobody seems to like want to quite like define them, because there's legal implications for like what they define them as, right?
Yes, of course. Okay.
Whereas in the financial sector, you know, you can critique it as much as you want, but they got very strict and clear legal definitions of what these instruments they issue are. And there's no ambiguity. It's like, this is a share certificate or a share token. We're issuing it. It entitles you to this and this and this, and this is the legal jurisdiction I'm working under, and this is what's going to happen. And you can code in whatever you want to that. Like, the system is actually extremely, for all your critiques, it's actually got, you know, it has a long history behind how it came to be that way.
Yes.
So I think sometimes the blockchain community is still learning that.
So do you think that it is more likely that blockchain technology will simply be absorbed by the existing system than it is that, for instance, all these new tokens and the new blockchain technologies will create their own system?
Well, I think both might happen. I mean, one thing I like about Bitcoin is it did open up a much wider conversation about money and open up a sense of creativity. The intellectual in me would be, say, unfortunately, it reinforced a bunch of mythology about finance rather than actually like clearing it up.
Say more about that. That's really interesting.
Well, in particular, I mean, Bitcoin is like got this very strange insistence on money as some kind of thing or object or commodity that somehow contains value. I mean, even in all the language around it, they say like, you know, value transfer systems. All right, so somehow these like objects like contain value, like this thing here contains water inside it, right? And I can pass you water. And like, this is like any serious, I come from an anthropology background, any like serious study of money systems knows that the story is just like total crap.
Okay.
I mean, I'm being a bit like rhetorical there, but like this is like, but it's still extremely prevalent in mainstream economics. It's extremely prevalent in many forms of mainstream thinking. If you want to really try and get into like the subtleties of money systems, you really have to move away from that idea of like money being an object that kind of gets stores value and it gets pushed around between people. But the Bitcoin community very much reinforces that. Whereas a lot of other alternative currency systems that existed prior to Bitcoin and have gone on for like hundreds of years very explicitly acknowledge that money is essentially a form of social contract / accounting system for recording obligations between people.
But certainly the distributed ledger can be used in that way also to record credits owed or
sure.
Or
I would like to see it done more explicitly though, right?
Okay.
I mean, Bitcoin very clearly is a ledger system, which is weird then, that the fact that the naming of Bitcoin is coin and all the visual imagery around it, you see all these like physical objects, right? And yet it's very obviously like a computer. It's a digital recording system. It's digital imprints, but these are not actual objects at all. It's an information recording system that sort of like masquerades as being some kind of commodity, which is psychologically very interesting. But you know, if anything, like Bitcoin's very obviously a ledger system. But one of the problems is the objects that get created or get recorded in the system don't have any explicit redeemability. Like the token, if you were using Bitcoin like a few years ago, like nobody knew what the tokens really did. It's like, oh, I can move them between each other.
Yes.
If you really want to get serious about money systems, you have to have like they essentially have to be claims upon other people. These tokens. That's what a real money system is.
Okay, and then that would have to be enforceable.
Yeah.
Which is not the case necessarily with.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. I mean, there's various ways you can enforce money systems. You don't have to have a state. Like a small scale money system, you can run purely on stuff like trust and shame. Like if you do not abide by the agreement, you'll be shunned from the community, or these types of things like that. You know, like it's not only. Whereas, you know, of course, in modern money systems, you've got like the taxation system is a big part of how the money system works. You have the bank debt system. These are all like what underpin, and then it's underpinned by gigantic network effects as well.
Okay.
You know, like so there's a lot of stuff that's going into these systems. I think Bitcoin these things only sort of like scratch the surface. If you really want to like hype it up and like actually make it usable, you've got to add in way more like sophistication into the systems.
So this is really fascinating because certainly what I'm seeing with ICOs is this rush for everyone to say, okay, well, what can we stick on a blockchain? What function of value exchange can we then put on a blockchain and then spin up an ICO around it? You're saying, look, it's not as simple as value transfer. We're looking at this incredibly complex system of interlocking systems, right? Where you're talking about, you know, enforceability and all of this stuff. So it seems like, from your perspective, maybe blockchain has a ways to go.
Yeah, sure.
And
Also, bear in mind, you say value transfer. I mean,
Okay.
like blockchain is like a coordination and management and information recording technology. All right, the value is the real stuff on the ground. It's like real humans and like real farmland and real like this is like the reality of an economy, right? Then you can have a layer that hovers over that, which is like contracting and information management between that. A lot of the original blockchain systems were literally just hovering above that, right? Now, a lot of the attempts now, let's say smart contracts, is like how do you fuse the digital representations of things that have value into the actual world, right? So like all the like connection between IoT and these contracts. Like if you really want to make digital representations of something have actually convey value in the real world, they have to be fused into that, either through a legal system. So like a judge has to be able to say, like, I can see that this claim is recorded on that particular ledger and therefore that thing's yours. Or else you have to have it in a proper smart contract system where it's like the thing is unusable unless you interact with the digital system.
I see. So that would be where the Internet of Things comes in, where the actual
Sure. I mean, I don't necessarily like that idea of some kind of like automated like world where you're having to like gain access to everything through whatever. Like, but like
Okay.
you know that's how you have to do it, right? And like I think there's a lot of confusion. I mean, like the real value in economies is literally people's bodies and natural resources. Like that's value. How you then choose to like contract and like assign ownership to that and like transfer the ownership rights and transfer like claims around it, like that's the sort of like the financial contractual layer, and that's what blockchain tends to be like operating on.
Okay.
And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Well, sometimes it's a glorified way of doing exactly the same thing we're already doing.
Right.
Like,
but maybe a little bit more efficiently.
maybe more efficiently, right?
Which really excites people.
Which is like what any company does. But then you got to ask yourself, what does disruption mean? Does disruption mean doing the same thing slightly more efficiently? So you disrupt the existing incumbents by being slightly more efficient than them? Which is what a lot of people say. It's I can move my title deeds of my house faster now. It's like, oh great, cool. Like as if that was such a massive problem before, right? Like this huge issue I have because like, I'm gonna move my house, like luckily you have a house. And versus stuff which is like actually disruptive, which might be like, I mean, only you can leave it to your imagination, like what really like breaks systems and does stuff like that. Where a lot of the stuff in blockchain tech I find a bit like dull. I mean, it's just like, cool, you figured out a more efficient way of doing something. Well done. Cool.
Okay. So with all of this said, how do you think that blockchain is actually going to change people's lives on the ground, let's say, in the next 5-10 years?
I mean, there's an interesting like value judgment in that question you asked me. Like it's like there's an assumption that it will.
Okay.
I mean, I don't necessarily assume it will. I mean, I'm not saying it wouldn't, but I think like if you want to going in with that attitude, like oh, how will this thing change people's lives? I mean, it's not guaranteed that it would change people's lives. I mean, I think you've got to be critical about that. And then it's only if you are critical about that that you will actually start to see where it really will do things.
And what is your answer to that?
I don't have a clear answer to that. I mean, I'm excited about like the kind of visions spun by that this could be a technology that enables collaborative, peer-to-peer, cooperative forms of organization without relying on the traditional structures we've used. So, for example, I find like the platform cooperatives movement, which is saying like, how could we collectively run Uber without having the company in the middle? You know, I find it interesting. I think that would be like a particularly interesting application of a blockchain technology. That could actually maybe have an impact on people. I'm not saying it would be like the only solution to the world's problems.
Right. I mean, I was just in Berlin where people were presenting on self-owning cars using the blockchain, where they're generating their own.
I mean, that sounds like bullshit to me. I mean, like, yeah, fine. If you want to work on like sci-fi like stuff, I mean, that often seems.
You have a very salty view about the future, it seems.
I mean, like the tech industry is full of like it's like I don't know. To me, it's like 85% like rhetoric.
Okay.
Often without understanding the implications of like the things you're talking about. You know, like I mean, not you, but like people in the scene saying, it's self-owning car. But why? I mean, why do you want a self-owning car? What's the point? You know, like it's kind of like that stuff like for the sake of it. Somehow.
Right. Well, like, certainly we're seeing a lot of that with ICOs, where things are. That's kind of what I was touching on before, where people are coming up with these ideas just for the sake of it, and because maybe they can raise some money.
I mean, if I was to critique the self-owning car concept, I'd say like a way more important thing in the world right now. If you're trying to grant rights to inanimate objects, why are you doing that before granting rights to animate creatures that already exist, such as like non-human creatures like dogs?
Yes.
You know, why are you so interested in giving a car rights but not like another actual being rights? You know, and there's a lot of this like bullshit that flies around in the tech industry. This like inability to like conceptualize what's actually meaningful. So that's why when you clear all that stuff away, like some of the most authentic for me, the most exciting things are around like decentralized technology systems that also have meaningful governance systems, such that the people who are using them have a meaningful say in how they're run, which currently is not the case in blockchain systems. In blockchain, you've got like a decentralized tech system with a very poor governance system. Like nobody, like I can use Bitcoin, but I have no say in how it's run. I have no real like, so it's like, essentially it's just like another centralized system to me, right? It's just another bureaucracy I interact with. So like until you actually have like a meaningful way to have some kind of say or some kind of whatever it is, like then it becomes very interesting. Because then you can have you can have the decentralized Uber, you can have cooperatives that are doing, say, like mutual insurance in countries where you don't have access to financial services. There's a whole number of these types of things you could come out of it. But I don't particularly find stuff like, we'll tokenize the world and form a more efficient trading system particularly interesting. I mean, that's just what corporations do already.
So you said that if maybe 85% is hype, then what's the 15% that really is the core use, you think?
Well, I don't know yet. I mean, that's like my suspicion that it's 15%. Like, maybe my message would be anybody who's going to a blockchain community is that, the profound aspect of blockchain technology is it's a means for a network of strangers to keep track of each other and each other's relative positions, or coordinate each other without a central party.
Okay.
Right? At least in the open versions. And then you've got to decide in what context that's actually an empowering thing. It's not obvious that's necessarily empowering in all situations. But you might say, hey, in certain contexts, that's going to be profound, that's going to be interesting. You might go to the context might be there's been a breakdown of the centralized system somewhere, and therefore maybe we can implement this other system. The context might be there's a centralized system that's being very abusive in this for example, like you might say Uber. Okay, let's form a decentralized version of it. Maybe it'll be less abusive. But only if you've got, there's a whole bunch of like contingencies to like whether or not the technology will actually be found. I mean, on the dystopian side, what would be really crap is if you implement a decentralized system that nobody can change and then they become dependent upon it.
Yes.
That's even worse than
Yes.
a centralized system, right?
Right.
We're still quite far away
Like
from that.
with an AI, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, like, why do you want that kind of thing? I mean, and I sometimes think people who like their world's immersed in technology start to fetishize digital technology for its own sake. They start to say, well, it's inevitable, we'll just move towards this. And that's bullshit. I mean, nothing's inevitable. You can stop things from happening, and you can if you don't want a particular outcome to happen, you can politically stop it. You can get together and say we decide as a community we don't want this particular thing. So all this kind of stuff like AIs will take over the world and we'll be living in a giant sprawling network of robots and whatever. I mean, it's I mean, it might be the case, but I'm going to fight it.
Okay. What would the most hopeful outcome do you think be? What would the most hopeful future for these technologies and how they're going to change society be?
All right. I don't necessarily have hopeful outlooks in the world. I mean, the
least dystopian. Let's put it that way.
I mean, to me, the world isn't something that's progressing towards a higher state. I mean, I tend to see stuff in terms of trade-offs. So it's you can fix one thing, but now you're going to cause a new problem.
Okay.
All right. So often what's happening in the world to me is you're trying to balance interests, and you're trying to balance stuff, and you're trying to decide what's the kind of best of both worlds kind of thing. So I don't tend to see the world in terms of what a lot of people in the entrepreneurial community will, which is this kind of solution mentality, that the world is a series of things we're trying to solve towards utopia. All right, you get better and better and better and better and better and better. I mean, it's clearly not true. I mean, for example, look at the sheer levels of ecological destruction we have in our world, which is what all the levels of prosperity have created, right? This is a clear example of a trade-off.
Yes.
And not thinking about those things is a very toxic thing. So so with blockchain, what I would hope is that there's some kind of it enables a fairer distribution of power. Without creating inhuman or inhumane systems that make people feel deeply alienated, and I hope it stays grounded to reality. That'll be cool if it does that.
Okay.
I'm sure it will. I mean, in reality, people, if it didn't do that, they would tear it down.
Right. Well, hopefully, as long as it's not too decentralized, right?
Yeah. Well, if you're gonna make it properly decentralized, make it actually decentralized. Bitcoin isn't decentralized. I mean, it's just in principle decentralized, right? It doesn't. It's not meaningfully decentralized.
But you actually have
real way.
whales who control most of the network.
Yeah, there's lots of things. So you got to be sort of pragmatic about what do you mean? What kind of balance between centralization and decentralization do you really want? I mean, our existing system isn't centralized, right? We've got a hybrid system right now of centralized, decentralized. I mean, a market, for example, is decentralized. We're surrounded by markets everywhere. All right, that's a decentralized system, but then there's centralized aspects that enable that decentralized system to work. The legal system and the money system and so on. So any system's a hybrid between these types of forces, and you've got to decide what the balance between them is, and sort of fetishizing particular outcomes is. It's either a sign of self-interest, or it's a sign of naivety.
Okay. So
that's my jaded perspective.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. It's a refreshing perspective. I mean, obviously, there's so much hype in blockchain. However, for the average individual who's looking at blockchain and doesn't fully understand it and wants to keep a pace of the times and the changes, what do you think the best thing to do would be?
Well, I mean, the best thing would immediately would just be to try out the systems. I mean, it's always best to get hands-on knowledge of how something works. Download some of the wallets and play around with them. But also don't go into it with the assumption that it's going to change everything. I mean, I work with lots of alternative economic systems beyond blockchain. And I'm always interested and I'm open-minded, but I'm not going, okay, this is going to be obviously going to solve everything. You have to kind of go into it with that mentality. So if you go into it with an open mentality, playful, creative, but without being uncritical, that's a good position to start with. Because then you're okay, I can see what I can do with this or what I can't do with it. And that's, in terms of actually reading up about it, I mean, there's lots of stuff out there. Probably best not to read people who are technical because they tend to be absolutely atrocious at describing blockchain technology. Try to understand the technology contextually. So don't just like zoom into blockchain and say, okay, what's the hashing functions and stuff. Look at it in comparison to other systems that you already know, because then you can see like what it's trying to do. That's often quite useful. So understanding Bitcoin relative to the existing banking sector. And don't only read people who are writing about blockchain technology, because frequently they don't actually have very holistic knowledge. So there's lots of, I could give loads of references, but that's pretty much it.
Awesome. So if people want to find out more about you and your writing, where should they go?
Well, you can type in Brett Scott in finance or money or something into the Google machine, the Oracle. Or you can get me on Suitpossum on Twitter, which is SUITPOSSUM.
All right, Brett, thank you so much for talking to me. It was a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.